a technological triumph. It gave birth to radar, financed development of rockets, and created the atomic bomb. Among these spectacular achievements was a quieter project, one that was shrouded in secrecy at the University of Pennsylvania. Behind the walls of this building, a small team of scientists and engineers created a machine designed specifically for war, but destined in the coming years to touch the lives of everyone. That machine was a computer. In 1946, this was the only working electronic computer in the entire world. Few people had heard of it. Fewer still regarded it as anything special. In less than 2 decades, computers would number in thousands. Rooms full of clerks would be replaced by these lightning-fast machines. In a few short years, computers would change forever the way the world did business. In so doing, become one of the largest and most powerful industries on Earth. In 1946, American moviegoers caught their first glimpse of this strange new machine.
Are people becoming obsolete? The giant electronic brain is concentrating at the University of Pennsylvania. It's made a vacuum tube like your radio, and it can add up a column of figures a yard long in a second. It's the world's first.
It was named ENIAC for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer.
Right now, it's solving mathematical problems for the U.S. Army. Who knows, someday a machine like this may check up on your income tax.
No one really believed the computer would have much to do with income taxes or any other aspect of everyday life. ENIAC had been created for one purpose: to calculate ballistic tables for the huge guns of World War II. Even after the war, most people thought this giant brain would remain isolated in a scientific laboratory, crunching numbers for the U.S. Army. Few people could imagine a market for more than a half dozen computers in the entire world.
People thought that the market for machines was just for a few, or a few dozen at most, and the market would saturate, and who would want any more? It's like you're trying to make a business of making atom smashers. Maybe you could make a little money on one or two, but then would you do for an encore?
But these two men thought differently. The creators of ENIAC, J. Presper Eckert and John Mauchly, believed the computer would command a greater destiny, serving not only science, but business as well.
When Eckert and Mauchly proposed to make a commercial venture out of building and selling electronic computers, a lot of people were very skeptical, and they raised a number of very interesting objections. The first one was that the machine was made out of large numbers of vacuum tubes, and these tubes were prone to burning out. In fact, if you could keep one of these machines like the ENIAC running for a few hours before a vacuum tube burned out, you considered that great.
ENIAC, with its 18,000 vacuum tubes, is the size of a small house, and in today's money it cost $3 million to build. This alone was enough for people to believe that computers were impractical as a commercial product. There was another, more pressing reason. ENIAC was a very difficult machine to use.
You almost required understanding of very advanced mathematics or logic to even get the computer to add two numbers together. And people felt that such a talent was so rare in the world that it didn't matter if you could mass-produce computers, you would never find enough people who had that skill to make them useful.
But the inventors of ENIAC, reluctant to abandon their dream of starting a computer company, set out to find financial backers.
Generally speaking, when we talk to businessmen and banks, financial institutions at that time, they took a very dim view of all this, and they really didn't have enough insight to see into the future or enough to believe anything like this could work. My father signed a note at the bank for $25,000, which helped us get started until we could get going.
With modest sum in hand, Presper Eckert and John Mauchly launched the world's first commercial computer company. This small Philadelphia firm constituted the entire U.S. computer industry in 1946. The next order of business for two entrepreneurs was to find a customer for their product. But who besides the United States Army would want such a machine? Eckert and Mauchly knew the answer to that question lay in the business community. Since the turn of the century, business relied on punch card tabulating machines for their record-keeping and accounting needs. One installation contained many single-purpose machines. E-punch machines to punch data onto cards. Sorters to sort those cards in alphabetic or numerical order. Tabulator to perform simple addition. And printers to print the results. Armies of clerks spent their days performing the same operations, shuffling punch cards from machine to machine. It was very tedious work.
Whenever you see teething or repetitiveness of any kind, that's a candidate for computation.
With that in mind, Eckert and Mauchly knew just where to go to sell their first computer, the United States Census Bureau. By the 1940s, the Census Bureau employed thousands of clerks and tabulating machines to process population data. They were drowning in punched cards, with enough paper files to fill a football field, and time was running out.
They had a census coming up in a few years, and the time it took to process the census was getting longer and longer. And they are mandated by Congress to get the census done in a certain length of time because elections are based upon it. And they were fearful that in the following election they wouldn't get done in time without something better than they had.
Over lunch at the Census Bureau, Eckert and Mauchly described their new machine to Morris Henson and his colleagues.
We thought it was magic. We didn't believe it was really feasible to begin with. As we talked more and more with them, we came to believe they knew what they were talking about and that they'd already demonstrated some important aspects of it in ENIAC.
With this order from the Census Bureau, the computer industry had finally begun. This footage, taken with John Mauchly's home camera, provides us with a glimpse of the company's beginnings. Named their computer UNIVAC, the Universal Automatic Computer. Within a few months, Eckert and Mauchly realized they had vastly underestimated the time and money their pioneering work would require. The company soon fell badly behind schedule and seriously in debt. It was a pattern the two inventors would repeat time and time again.
They were terrific engineers and designers. They were not terrific business people. They had problems, and they gave us estimates, and unfortunately for them, in a sense, we made a contract with them, a fixed-price contract to produce a UNIVAC, which ties us down legally. And that wasn't enough money for them to produce a UNIVAC, nor was the time schedule enough. These are not criticisms. When you're doing developmental work like this is what you get to run to. But they had anticipated enough of this kind of a problem.
Alone in their field, Eckert and Mauchly were inventing the future, and there were many unknowns. They spent considerable resources developing special components like magnetic tape, mercury tanks, both to store data, the electronic equivalent of boxes of paper files. Starting the new territory took its toll on the company. After a year in business, the Eckert Mauchly Computer Company was struggling to stay alive. Once again, they tried to obtain loans or attract investors, but no one, it seemed, would take a chance on these two pioneers or their unproven technology. Time was not on their side. Meanwhile, 3,500 miles away in London, Britain's computer industry was also just beginning. This would turn out to be one of the most unusual episodes in computer history. This is the J. Lyons Company, a wholesale food business that distributed tea, pastries, and other food items throughout the United Kingdom. J. Lyons produced more than 40,000 products and employed more than 30,000 people. It seems strange that a company which produced tea and pastries would start Britain's commercial computer industry, yet that's just what happened.
You had in the senior management of the office in Lyons some extremely far-sighted people with a considerable mathematical background. So it wasn't any surprise, really, that when they heard about these giant brains in the British newspapers, they thought to themselves, this is something we must investigate.
After the war, the Lyons Company was desperate for a way to streamline its growing operation, particularly such costly and tedious clerical tasks as inventory control, payroll, and invoicing. What Lyons needed was a computer. In 1947, there was no computer to buy in London, so this innovative company decided to build their own. To learn how, they made a deal with Cambridge University, whose own work on a computer called EDSAC was well underway. In 1951, 3 years after they made the deal with Cambridge, the Lyons Company completed its computer. They called it the Lyons Electronic Office, appropriately named Leo. Leo was soon put to work processing Lyons Company payroll, completing in less than 7 hours what previously taken 200 clerks almost a week to do. It wasn't long before other British firms heard about Leo and asked Lyons to build them one. Inspired by this demand, in 1954, the Lyons Company, purveyors of tea and pastries, added a new product line, computers. Back in America, Eckert and Mauchly's path had not gone as smoothly. By 1948, they had been in business 2 years and were still far behind schedule. While Presper Eckert worked feverishly on the Census Bureau's UNIVAC, John Mauchly searched for more customers to relieve their financial crisis. Most companies he approached showed little more than a passing interest in computers. There were exceptions. The Prudential Insurance Company had an urgent need for high-speed computing. Hundreds of new accountants would have been needed to comply with a new law requiring them to recalculate insurance rates. To help with the massive job, Prudential ordered a UNIVAC in 1948. There were other contracts under negotiation, important Defense Department contracts that could have put the Eckert-Mauchly Company on the road to solvency. But on top of everything else, political ends would get away.
Apparently the President and I now agree on the necessity of getting rid of communists.
McCarthyism cast its shadow over the Eckert-Mauchly Company. The men who had built ENIAC with top-secret security clearance during World War II were now under suspicion of having communist ties.
Those were the days of McCarthyism in Washington. Their idea was to pull your security clearance and not even tell you why. So contracts you had lined up, customers you had lined up, who were going to invest money in your projects, just quietly pulled out and wouldn't tell you why.
But this is why. In the early 1940s, John Mauchly came to the attention of the FBI. He had attended a meeting of a scientific organization that, unknown to him, had a communist affiliation. This single event prevented him from obtaining security clearances needed to work on defense projects. It would take nearly a decade for John Mauchly to clear his name, and he carried the resentment with him until his death in 1980. With loss of those defense contracts, the Eckert-Mauchly Company sank deeper into debt, putting the very future of the fledgling American computer industry in jeopardy. Then in 1948, help came from a most unlikely source.
Runners up. And they're off.
The American Totalizator Company, makers of the mechanical equipment that calculate odds and displayed payoff at racetracks, headed by Harry Strauss. Man of vision, Strauss foresaw the day when computers might replace his totalizer equipment. To hedge his bets, Strauss purchased a 40% interest in Eckert-Mauchly, injecting desperately needed funds into the company. The next year, the Eckert-Mauchly Computer Company underwent rapid expansion, increasing staff from 40 to 134 employees. But this prosperity would be short-lived. Eckert and Mauchly's last best hope vanished when Harry Strauss died in a plane crash in October 1959. 1 month later, Strauss partners notified Eckert and Mauchly they wanted out of the computer business.
When they just wanted to get out of something which they regarded as a financial loss. They also didn't think it was going to work. They didn't have any faith in it, as Mr. Strauss did. And so they encouraged us to get somebody else to buy the idea out as soon as possible.
All was lost for the two inventors who had had such high hopes only 4 years earlier. It was now clear the American computer industry, if there was to be one at all, would not be led by the Eckert-Mauchly Company. On February 1st, 1950, Caspar Eckert and John Mauchly sold their firm to Remington Rand, then one of the largest business machine companies in the world. Remington Rand sold a variety of products, including typewriters, filing cabinets, and punched card tabulating machines. For the general public, they were best known for their electric shippers. James Rand, president of Remington Rand, looked to speculate in new ventures. He also wanted to gain a foothold in this new field of electronics. The challenge now fell to Remington Rand to prove that computers could be sold commercially. Under Remington Rand's label, the first UNIVAC was finally installed at the U.S. Census Bureau, almost a year late, considerably over budget. The delivery of the first commercial-built computer only raised a back-page story, little noticed by the general public. Within a year, the name UNIVAC would be on the lips of millions of Americans, thanks to a brilliant public relations move by Remington Rand.
Good evening, everyone. This is Walter Cronkite speaking to you from CBS Television Election Headquarters here in New York City. The big election night, 1852.
On this night, UNIVAC was catapulted from obscurity into national recognition with its television debut.
Let's turn to that miracle of modern age, the electronic brain UNIVAC and Charles Collingwood.
This is the face of a UNIVAC. A UNIVAC is a fabulous electronic machine which we borrowed to help us predict this election from the base of the early returns as they come in. UNIVAC is going to try to predict the winner for us just as early as we can possibly get the returns in.
For the first time, a computer was asked to predict the outcome of an election. But things did go exactly as planned.
This is not a joke or a trick. It's an experiment. We think it's going to work. We don't know. We hope it works. Anyway,
at 8 o'clock, Collingwood asked UNIVAC to type out its prediction.
Hey, say something, UNIVAC. Can you tell us what your prediction is now on the basis of the returns that we've had so far? Have you got a prediction for us, UNIVAC? I don't know. I think that UNIVAC is probably an honest machine, a good deal more honest than a lot of commentators who are working, and he doesn't think he's got enough to tell us anything about yet. We'll be back with it later.
What Collingwood didn't know was that UNIVAC did have something to say. This was it. Just before CBS went on the air, UNIVAC predicted Eisenhower would beat Stevenson by a landslide. The problem was, no one believed it.
The machine turned up this answer that they didn't believe. Polls were telling them there's going to be out a 50-50 election, and we were telling them it's a landslide with only 5% of the vote. And they couldn't believe that you could predict the thing as accurately as we did, which was in a few percent, with only 5% of the vote. So everybody was thrown into total confusion.
Excuse me. The McCarthy...
The confusion would not last long.
At the moment.
Votes were now pouring in for Eisenhower. Even before all the polls closed, it was clear that UNIVAC had been right all along. General Eisenhower was winning by the largest landslide in nation history. After midnight, CBS confessed to the public what happened.
As more votes came in, the odds came back, and it was obviously evident that we should have had nerve enough to believe the machine in the first place. It was right. We were wrong. Next year, we'll believe it.
The next day, the headline said it all. The whole world took notice of UNIVAC.
One of these machines where you push a button and it does you want to do. Not a robot people. Not quit.
It wasn't long before UNIVAC began appearing in the movies. Even in cartoons. While UNIVAC captured the attention of Hollywood, it was also catching the eye of its intended customers. By the end of 1953, there were 3 UNIVACs installed and orders for 9 more. And there seemed to be no competition in sight. Not even from Remington Rand's closest rival. Today, the name IBM is synonymous with computers. But in the 1940s, the company showed little interest in these new machines. IBM seemed content to stay the punch card tabulating equipment that it pioneered at the turn of the century. And since that time, IBM had placed tabulating machines in every conceivable business environment, from small wholesale firms to huge data processing centers. For half a century, IBM had grown rich on a technology that would soon be rendered obsolete by electronic computers. But IBM did not recognize it. The president of IBM, Thomas Watson Sr., was not unaware of computers. He had even built this monstrosity called the SSEC. It was a hybrid machine, part electronic, part electromechanical. Completed in 1948, Watson dedicated the SSEC to scientific research, thus ending his foray into computers. Like most people at the time, he thought computers were purely scientific machines. He did not believe they posed any threat to his beloved tabulating equipment. But when the Census Bureau, an organization that used hundreds of tabulators, ordered a UNIVAC, one IBM vice president became alarmed, Tom Watson, Jr.
I'll never forget how I felt about the economic contract in the Census Bureau. I felt a sense of great panic. And went back to Washington, to New York City from Washington, and had a late-night conference saying, look, this is the beginning of the end for the IBM company unless we recognize it and do something about it.
Tom Watson Jr. knew that IBM could lose everything if the company did get into the computer business. But nothing's done at IBM without his father's approval.
He would not listen to those of us in IBM who were advancing those thoughts. However, he would listen to his son. He would oppose his son. When he opposed or disagreed with others in IBM management and his son, their jobs were in jeopardy. Therefore, he created a culture of yes men around him. His son was not a yes man. His son fought his father, contested his father's views, and of course, being a son, he survived.
But when I say, well, look, Dad, if we don't take this business, somebody else take it for it, because we're not being pushed by the market. We're market-driven. We're not driving the market. The market is driving us. We've got to try to get ahead of some stormy sessions getting there, but at the end of the road, he was agreeable.
IBM finally took its first steps into the computer age with a production line of 20 scientific computers. The year was 1951, 5 years after Eckert and Mauchly had started their UNIVAC. That delay would come to haunt Tom Watson Jr., for while IBM was building its scientific computer, UNIVAC was slowly stealing away IBM's commercial customers. This so infuriated the younger Watson that he vowed to focus all his energy beating UNIVAC, and this time was free to lead the charge. After 40 years at the helm, Thomas Watson Sr. stepped aside, putting his son Tom in charge of the company. IBM's fate was now in Tom Watson Jr.'s hands. Watson introduced one of IBM's first business computers in 1953. At first glance, it was no match for UNIVAC. The IBM 650 was slow and inefficient. It did have one big advantage. IBM's sales force, the company's greatest asset and the envy of IBM's competitors.
I think we made such rapid progress when initially some of those companies had better technology than we had, and certainly had better knowledge of how to use the technology. We were able to zip right by them with sales and service force.
IBM's sales force was the powerful legacy of Thomas Watson Sr. His approach to sales was ferocious, and his understanding of salesmen superb. He rewarded them with high commissions, pushed them with quotas, inspired them with speeches, educated them in classrooms, and punished them if they didn't toe the line.
Well, he expected at least the moon and perhaps the sun from his salesman. He wanted a good sales job, and he wanted a lot of orders because we grew with orders. He also used to say, look, the salesman is the man who makes things happen in the United States. Nothing happens until something is sold. And it's manufactured, it's delivered, it's used, but nothing happened. So the salesman, in his mind, was a sort of an American hero, and perhaps very high on the list of American heroes.
These heroes of IBM soon convinced hundreds of ordinary businessmen to buy the 650 computer. Orders started pouring in. It became known as the Model T of the computing industry, the first truly mass-produced computer. Within a year, IBM sold almost 1,000.
The 650, for one thing, was relatively expensive. Usable models were no more than $250,000, some of them even less. And perhaps more importantly, the 650 fit directly into existing punch card installations. It used punch card readers and punches and printers that the customer already had and was familiar with.
That was the genius of the IBM 650. Although tabulating equipment made the machine run much slower, it was easier for customers to use. Univac, on the other hand, required its customers to give up the old equipment and transfer punch card data onto magnetic tape. That was a more efficient way to process information, and customers were more comfortable with the old way. In 1956, IBM soared past Remington Rand as the largest computer company in the world. Tom Watson Jr. had won in his battle for survival.
The punch card business was most of IBM's business, so if they didn't carry on beyond this, they were done. Whereas Remington Rand, the punch card business, and our business was only like 10% of it or something. They had typewriters and all this other stuff, and razors and everything else that were doing well at that time, so that there was the same incentive to push forward with us as there was in IBM either.
And I've always felt that if Remington Rand had just concentrated on the company that they bought, they could have swept the field, because they had 3 commercial machines installed, while we had none.
The 1950s came to a close. IBM had captured more than 3/4 of the U.S. computer market. The rest was shared by Remington Rand and a half dozen other companies. With almost 10,000 computers in operation in the United States, it was not clear, even to the early skeptics, that computers could be a useful and reliable business tool. But the advertisements failed to mention one important thing.
In the late 1950s, the computer manufacturers' advertisements and proposals were rosy, and we who were making those promises turned out to buyers. We didn't know we were, but we were. Problem was software development.
Writing software, the programs that tell the computer what to do, turned out to cost 2, 3, even 4 times the price of the machine itself.
In fact, the problem of software development grew so severe that it really threatened the further growth of the computer industry.
Computers costing thousands of dollars a month would sit idle while programmers struggled with the arcane language that computers understand.
We BX10E, AOR10. Well, this AOR gets us into a BSN11. Don't we want a BSN12 instead?
Unfortunately, computers cannot execute programs written in English. They require a special language of their own.
The computer only understands language of binary, and it's really a code, not a language. Binary simply means zeros and ones, analogous to an electric light switch, which is either on or off.
The zeros and ones of binary code make it perfectly suited to computers that operate with thousands of electrical switches. In binary, the number 1 represents a switch that is turned on, and the number 0 represents a switch that is turned off. But what works well for computers does not work well for human beings.
If one simply looked at an example of what the binary code would have to be for 5 times 7 plus 3, one can see that it's incredibly difficult to write that kind of thing accurately. In the first place, it's tedious to write it, and in the second place, it's almost impossible to do it correctly.
Impossible because most programs were thousands of lines long, millions of zeros and ones. Programmers labored long, tedious hours trying to create programs. Often they just didn't work. Then they spent even more tedious hours trying to find their errors. As had been predicted, this was not a job that attracted many people.
The shortage of programmers could, in the worst case, have caused the growth of the computer industry to come to a dead halt because there were so few programmers. Without programmers, you don't have programs, that's to say software, and without software, the computer is useless. You might just as well have an automobile without a driver. It doesn't go anywhere. It just sits there.
It soon became clear the software crisis could only be solved by making programming easier to do, to create higher-level languages closer to human language. The first high-level language that became significantly used was Fortran. It was a language that could be used by scientists and mathematicians, and was much easier to program in because it allowed them to write equations in the way we're used to. Fortran was great for scientists and mathematicians, but it was almost no use to business users who need their own language, one that could handle letters as well as numbers, and could process files of data.
For that, you needed a different kind of language, and that led to the development of COBOL, which stands for Common Business-Oriented Language. COBOL was very English-oriented, that is to say, you wrote the programs in a language which was certainly not identical to English, but at least looked like English when you read it and wrote it.
COBOL was terrific for programmers, easy to use and to find errors. And with the help of another piece of software called Compiler, the COBOL program is automatically translated back to the binary code that the computer understands. Higher-level languages like COBOL ushered in an endless variety of new uses for computers, even the unconventional ones.
Operating around the clock, this communication center receives and processes all incoming requests for police service. In Kansas City, Missouri, the American Heart Association dedicated a new electronic computer on hand to push the starting switch and make its man champion Herford Bull HR Silver Edge 70. This hook switch started a new IBM 1401 computer that will keep track of all registered records. Silver immediately became the first animal ever to trace his own ancestry and appeared quite interested in the result.
But most computers were found in administrative offices, where those armies of clerks were beginning to disappear, replaced by a single computer. Computers also started showing up in factories, controlling machines and processes that once required hundreds of human hands. A new word was coined to describe what is happening: automation.
Automation is a young, new word, heavy with promise and with problem. As a matter of fact, several people have suggested to us that it's a little too heavy for Sunday afternoon in June. Could be. We'll see.
Automation became the burning issue of the time. Millions of workers wondered when they would be replaced by one of these giant brains. Television documentaries explored both sides of the issue.
Well, can my 4 children go hungry because of automation? Or what will I have to do? What do I supposed to do if they do go hungry? What sense are choices left of me to turn the crime because of automation?
And it's true that this plant will cause a layoff of some of our loyal workers. However, it's a necessity to do it to be competitive in today's industry.
Hollywood also reflected the growing fear of computers in the workplace.
No. You know what he's doing here? What? He's trying to replace us all with a mechanical brain. He's on special assigned to his eye to see if MRAC can be adapted to this department. That means the end of us all.
Peg, calm down. No machine can do our job.
That's what they said in payroll.
Movies like Death revealed conflicting emotions computers stirred up in society. While many people viewed them with fear and disdain, others thought they represented progress, the future, a relief from tedious tasks.
Good girl.
Perhaps the staunchest advocates for computers were the computer manufacturers. Tom Watson Jr. was often called upon to defend his machines against an onslaught of bad publicity.
A lot of people call these machines giant brains, and whenever I hear the term, it makes me shudder. Because they are giant tools, they're certainly not giant brains. If you have good tools, you're upgrading man, not downgrading them.
That was a common argument, that computers replaced jobs nobody wanted. Certainly it was true at the Bank of America, which employed 2,500 bookkeepers just to process personal checking accounts. Every day they sorted and recorded more than 9 million checks. It was an exceptionally tedious job for humans, but the perfect job for a computer. In 1961, the Bank of America replaced its entire staff of bookkeepers with a computer system named IRMA.
This is Los Angeles, and I'm Ronald Reagan. May I hear, please?
In one of his lesser-known roles, Ronald Reagan was the commercial spokesman for General Electric, IRMA's manufacturer.
Bank of America has called this new system electronic recording method of accounting, or by the more familiar, friendlier term, IRMA. Competent, experienced bookkeeper using conventional mechanical equipment is expected to do the sorting and posting for up 250 accounts an hour. IRMA can sort and post 550 accounts a minute.
Magnetic ink characters were the key to the IRMA system. Using those numbers, the checks were sorted at the rate of 750 a minute, and the account information was kept on reels of magnetic tape. IRMA was more than 100 times faster than the best human bookkeeper, and virtually error-free.
Now, we think that IRMA displaced thousands of bookkeepers
Well, we created other jobs in the bank because of IRMA. I mean, somebody had to handle all the reports coming back from the IRMA centers. Somebody had to prepare the work going to the IRMA centers. There were other jobs that were created that were quite as boring and tedious as being a bookkeeper.
Computers like IRMA did change the nature of people's work, and some jobs were eliminated. But these were prosperous times in America. The fear of computers replacing human workers would slowly subside as employment continued to rise. One industry that was experiencing unprecedented growth during the 1950s was the vacuum tube business. Computers gobbled vacuum tubes as fast as the manufacturers could turn them out. The Air Force computer alone used 55,000 vacuum tubes. And tubes were at the heart of every radio. Electronics' newest marvel, television. The vacuum tube boom was about to come to an abrupt end, thanks to a tiny electronic component that some have called the most important invention of the 20th century, the transistor. To most people, the transistor meant small portable radios. But this tiny component would begin to change the entire field of electronics, thanks to inventors Walter Brattain, John Bardeen, and William Shockley. In 1956, just 8 years after their groundbreaking work, Brattain, Bardeen, and Shockley received the Nobel Prize.
The transistor was much smaller than a vacuum tube, for example, perhaps a 50th the size. It weighed about 100 times less than a vacuum tube. It gave off no heat. It required a fraction of the electrical power that a vacuum tube needed. What that meant for engineers designing computers is that with transistors, they could now think in terms of designing computers that were much, much more complex and powerful than anybody would have dreamed of designing using vacuum tube technology. As soon as they did that, you see, they ran into this problem of how do you wire them all together? You had this incredible tangle of wiring.
Transistors enabled engineers to design fantastically powerful computers. They were only dreams on a piece of paper. Such computers could never be built simply because so many components could not be wired together. This wiring nightmare became known as the tyranny of numbers, and until it was solved, all progress was blocked. The tyranny of numbers soon became the most important problem in the field of electronics. Every engineer wanted to solve it.
Finally, two engineers independently came up with a solution to this problem. The first was Jack Kilby, an engineer at Texas Instruments in Texas. The second was Robert Noyce of Fairchild in California.
At Fairchild Semiconductor, Robert Noyce worked at the first manufacturable IC, or integrated circuit. And this is what it looked like. Essentially, it is just one piece of silicon. The cone-shaped structures are transistors that were made by chemically altering small sections of the piece of silicon. Other areas of the silicon were altered to create other electronic components. Then to wire everything together, a layer of metal was evaporated on top of the structure. With the invention of the integrated circuit, the tyranny of numbers, the tedious hand wiring of electronic components had been solved, because wiring was now part of the manufacturing process. As an added bonus, the circuitry of a whole board could now be reduced to the size of a fingernail. Both Texas Instruments and Fairchild announced the integrated circuit in 1959. But surprisingly, electronics firms were not interested in buying this new marvel. For some, the integrated circuit was just too radical a change, but for most, it was just too expensive. For 2 years, ICs lay virtually unused by the electronic establishment. Then, almost overnight, world events changed the future of the integrated circuit.
This is BBC Home News. Here is you. All Moscow is waiting to give hero's welcome to the world's first spaceman, Major Gagarin of the Soviet Air Force.
In 1961, the orbital flight of cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin stunned the world. In the midst of the Cold War, this Soviet success raised the specter of Russian domination in space. Facing sharp criticism at home and embarrassment abroad, President Kennedy issued a remarkable challenge to the nation's scientific community.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving a goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The challenge of sending a man to the moon fell to NASA scientists, who quickly realized that a spaceship would need to have its own computer on board to enter and leave the lunar orbit. But how could put a computer into a spacecraft that could barely fit 3 astronauts? Even transistorized computers weigh more than a ton and contained miles of wire. In addition, they had to be carefully protected from heat and vibration, hardly devices to be put aboard a spaceship. NASA scientists knew a small, lightweight computer could only be built from integrated circuits, and they were willing to pay any price. So was the Pentagon. A Cold War between two superpowers demanded weapons of unprecedented sophistication. In the early 1960s, computers made from integrated circuits were getting the Minuteman II missiles, the submarine-launched Polaris missiles, and Air Force jets. Working around the clock to meet the needs of both NASA and the military, electronics firms discovered the true genius of the integrated circuit. Unlike the old hand-wired transistor circuits, ICs could be mass-produced.
I compared it one time to the printing press. That in this case, you design it once and reproduce it many times very, very inexpensively, compared to, let us say, having monks write down the book and copy it by hand, which was sort of the way we were building electronics at that time. We were taking all the elements and then putting them together. With the integrated circuit, we got the chance of doing the whole thing identically, time after time.
In 1960, the first integrated circuit cost $1,000 and had fewer than 10 transistors. During the next 10 years, ICs underwent enormous change. Every year, the number of components on an integrated circuit doubled. Within a decade, the cost of an IC had dropped to pennies, while the power had increased 1,000-fold. Nothing like this had ever happened in the history of any commercial product.
For an analogy, if the auto industry had moved at the same speed as our industry, your car today would cruise comfortably 1 million miles an hour, probably get 500,000 miles per gallon of gasoline. But it would be cheaper to throw away your Rolls Royce and buy a new one than to park it downtown for the evening.
As the electronics industry grew, these California peach and prune orchards were transformed into the concrete and steel of Silicon Valley. With 200 electronics firms in a 30-mile strip of land, even the streets bear witness to the growing importance of this new industry. 8 years after John Kennedy's challenge, NASA's onboard computer built from integrated circuits was completed. For its power, it was the smallest computer in the world. "72 hours after blastoff, the tiny onboard computer would take over, guiding the Apollo 11 lunar module into the moon orbit. The success of the mission and lives of its astronauts depended on this small computer. It was the ultimate test of the integrated circuit's reliability. The astronaut would have to maneuver into orbit on the far side of the moon, out of contact with mission control.
We'll see you on the other side, over. Roger. And we've had lots of signals. Apollo 11 goes behind the moon.
Now they were on their own, their fate resting on the ability of the onboard computer to ease them into orbit. The computer performed flawlessly. The whole world watching, Apollo 11 finally landed on the moon's surface.
Got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're bringing again. Crank line. Have a step up the lane now. That's one small step for man. One giant leap for man.
This remarkable achievement was celebrated by millions of Americans, among them a generation of children who had never known a world without space travel or computers. As the 1960s came to a close, a growing group of computer enthusiasts began to dream of owning their own computers.
This was a thing we'd grown up to love. When I was in high school, I told my father that someday, back then, a mini computer with 4 GB of RAM cost as much as a house. I told my father I've decided someday I'm going to have an apartment instead of a house, and I'm going to buy myself a computer. I'm going to be the one person that owns a computer.
Steve Wozniak and his partner Steve Jobs, children of the Woodstock generation, would help write the next chapter of the computer revolution, putting the power of computer into the hands of millions of people. The Gelion Company only sold 100 computers in 10 years. Today, the descendants of Leo Computer Division, like most of Britain's computer industry, is owned by Fujitsu. IBM is now the most profitable corporation in the world, with assets larger than many nations. Eckert and Mauchly's patent for the ENIAC computer was judged invalid in 1971. Today, no one holds a patent for the invention of the computer.